The Wreck Valley dive team arrives at Babylon's Village Dock at 5:30 a.m. on a Saturday morning. We immediately begin to load our dive equipment aboard the charter dive boat Southern Cross. We don't get the opportunity to dive the wreck of the Linda too often, so we're all keeping our fingers crossed for some decent conditions and visibility today. Recent weather conditions have been good, and the water offshore is normally crystal clear. The Southern Cross is a 35-foot main coaster that runs out of Fire Island Inlet on Long Island's South Shore. The Southern Cross is owned by Captain Phil Galletta, has a 12-foot beam, cruises at 12 knots, and is powered by a 300-horsepower Volvo turbo diesel. Her location just inshore from Fire Island Inlet allows the captain to choose from a wide assortment of exciting shipwreck destinations. Joining me today is my old friend Captain Phil Galletta and his wife Barbara, co-owners of the Southern Cross. Janet Beezer, part-time captain aboard the Southern Cross. Cameraman Steve Belinda and Mike McMeekin. Underwater cameraman Joe Koppelman. And my longtime dive partner Rick Schwarz. The Southern Cross runs charters from the end of April through November of each year. Today, Captain Phil has chartered a course that will take us over 20 miles offshore to the wreck of the unidentified schooner we call the Linda. The Linda sits off Fire Island on the south shore of Long Island in an area we know as Wreck Valley. As we cruise offshore through Fire Island Inlet, we can see that it's a picture-perfect day. The sun is shining and the sea conditions are flat calm, with only a mild breeze blowing lightly out of the southeast. As we continue to cruise offshore, let's now take a look at the history of the Linda wreck. The Linda is an unidentified wood wreck, most likely a schooner. For years, many people have speculated that this wreck is actually the remains of the Charles R. Morse. The Charles R. Morse is presumed to be the schooner that struck and sunk the passenger liner Oregon on March 14, 1886. I've even seen many articles that desperately try to connect the two by association of date and location. I, for one, am not convinced. In fact, although it's possible, I would expect an extreme amount of bow damage to a small wooden schooner that pierced through the huge steel hull of the Oregon. In fact, the New York Times reported that the coaster, which had done all the damage, drifted about in the neighborhood of the Oregon throughout the morning, her headgear all gone and her cutwater stove in. The bow of the Linda wreck is relatively intact. Only time will tell her true identity. Someone will surely find an artifact that will allow us to settle this debate once and for all. Today, the Linda lies 20 miles out of Fire Island Inlet, about 10 miles southwest of the Oregon wreck. She sits upright in 135 to 140 feet of water and is best known for the amount of deadeyes that have been recovered from her remains. Her bowsprit is broken off and sits in the sand. A large anchor is mounted on her port side. The wreck's sides are intact, but her stern is broken down and scattered. The wreck's interior decking has collapsed, exposing her cargo of coal. Off the wreck's starboard side is a debris field, possibly the remains of her deck or deck cabin. Captain Phil locates the sunken wreck's remains by utilizing the Southern Cross's Loran and depth recorder. Once the wreck's hulk is located, a marker buoy is dropped. Captain Phil maneuvers the Southern Cross and positions her directly above the wreckage. His plan is to anchor in the bow, which will enable us to easily pick out landmarks and navigate around the site. Within only a few minutes, the grapple anchor is dropped to snag into the Linda's broken remains. Once the grapple anchor has grabbed into the wreck, it's time to suit up and get ready to go diving. Most of the Dive Wreck Valley team chooses to wear dry suits for thermal protection while exploring northeast shipwrecks. Even though it's mid-season and the surface water is warming, temperatures beneath the thermocline and on the bottom can still be quite chilly. Dry suits are always highly recommended for warmth and comfort on any of Wreck Valley's deeper shipwrecks, especially if a long dive is planned. Today I'll be using twin Sherwood 120 cubic foot Genesis tanks with redundant regulators. This rig will provide more than an adequate air supply for the planned duration of our dive to the Linda. The Linda sits in deep water, beyond the recommended recreational diving limits. Deep dives like this require not only proper equipment, but experience and strict planning. As Captain Phil plans out his dive profile, Greg, who mates aboard the Southern Cross, will descend first to secure the grapple into the wreck. This way the hook won't break free while we're filming. This wreck sits on a clean, sandy bottom, and from past experience is well known for excellent visibility. Our dive team is not only ready, but eager to explore this wreck's sunken remains. Once we're all suited up, it's time to take the plunge and jump into the translucent but chilly Atlantic. One by one, we each make our way to the Southern Cross's stern and jump off, eager to see what awaits us below. Stay tuned. When Dive Wreck Valley returns, we'll be descending to explore the wreck of the Linda. Descend, we realize that conditions are absolutely perfect today. Visibility must be at least 50 feet or better. When we reach the bottom, we find that we're anchored into the Linda's bow. Captain Phil immediately starts to swim aft along the inside starboard bulkhead. Divers wishing to stay within the recreational depth limits can stay high on these walls, which stand a good 10 feet off the sand. Joe Koppelman is already busy filming the Linda's bow section. We utilize Amphibico video housings to film all the underwater scenes of Dive Wreck Valley. These aluminum housings are rugged and easily stand up to the rigors of northeast wreck diving. The Linda's bowsprit is broken off of the wreck and now lies in the sand, almost completely covered with a drag-is lost fishnet. The ship's huge fluted anchor is still recognizable and is mounted to the port side of the Linda's bow. As Mike swims around her bow, we start to head astern. Captain Phil has already caught his first lobster. This one's small, so Phil places it back in its hole to grow a bit larger. Phil then continues to head astern. Just after her bow is the schooner's large winch, once used to raise her heavy anchor. Joe films the wreck's coal-covered interior. This cargo of coal has been used by many marine historians in their argument that this is actually the wreck of the Charles R. Morse, which also had a cargo of coal. Unfortunately, coal was a common cargo in the era, and any similarity is most likely only coincidental. Mike swims over some large steel rings, possibly mast hoops, sitting on the coal-covered interior of the wreck. Within a few minutes, Phil spots a lobster and stops to catch the crustacean. Lobsters seem to thrive on most area shipwrecks, and the Linda is no exception. After catching the bug, Phil decides that the lobster is a little too small to keep and will release it to grow larger. Marine growth on the site is thick and almost completely blankets this deep-water wreck's wooden remains. Swimming astern along our starboard side, we soon find a debris field which appears to be the remains of her decking. While swimming astern, Phil spots another lobster hiding amongst the Linda's remains. This one's a bit larger and will certainly make for a delicious meal, once captured that is. Catching lobsters is a mixture of both talent and bravery. The neoprene gloves worn by divers provide little defense to the powerful claws of a large lobster. Every once in a while, the lobster will actually win, or at least makes you pay a much higher price for the luxury of a seafood dinner. In this case, while trying to hold the lobster and open his goodie bag, the big bug makes a desperate escape attempt and in the struggle, grabs Phil's finger. Phil tries not to let on, but you know it's gotta hurt. Large lobsters can actually crush a Coke bottle with their powerful crusher claws. But this one has grabbed Phil with its pincher claw, which is not quite as strong. Before long, Phil pries the lobster claw free and stores the bug in his mesh bag. Later this evening, Phil will get his revenge when he sits down to a nice lobster dinner. Meanwhile, Mike locates a brass spike lying in the sand and scoops up the artifact before continuing on his way. Joe decides to lend a hand to an otherwise doomed small lobster that had become tangled in a dragger's lost net. These nets not only cause a hazard to divers, but continue to trap marine life, causing a substantial environmental problem. Lings seem to thrive around most shipwrecks, and the Linda is no exception. We also observe some large scallops and quite a few little stingrays in the sand all around the Linda wreck site. Continuing his search for lobsters, Phil looks deep into every hole along the Linda's outside wall until a lobster is located. Then it's just a matter of the diver positioning himself correctly, technique, and speed. When everything is done right, the lobster is quickly captured and pulled from the wreckage. This lobster is fairly large and weighs about 4 pounds. Phil carefully handles the bug which will be transported in Phil's mesh bug bag. An abundant supply of lobsters and seafood is only one of the many advantages area wreck divers enjoy over their landlocked counterparts. On a wreck like the Linda, divers can not only expect to come home with a lobster dinner, but should also always keep a sharp lookout for artifacts. On the Linda's port side, we spot a fisherman's lost Danford anchor, which had become tangled in a net. These anchors are quite expensive and well worth salvaging, but we decide not to waste the precious bottom time today and continue towards the stern. This large codfish had its tail bitten off, probably the result of an encounter with a shark. Sharks are common in this area, yet are rarely observed by divers. As Steve films the Linda's broken down stern section, Rick Schwartz spots a brass spike sticking out of the sandy bottom. This spike will make a fine artifact once polished and preserved. Rick will carefully store the artifact in his goodie bag before continuing his exploration. Only a short distance away, Mike McMeekin spots a deadeye sitting exposed in the sand. Deadeyes are a prized, sought-after artifact for area wreck divers, and this one looks to be in great condition. Mike wastes no time and quickly pulls the deadeye out of the sand. Mike then rigs his 250-pound lift bag to the artifact. Unfortunately, Mike's planned bottom time is quickly running low. He located the deadeye at the tail end of his dive, and now there's little time to rig the bag properly and send it to the surface with the security of an upline. Racing against the clock, Mike is forced to add air to the bag and send the bag to the surface untethered, and can only hope that one of Phil's mates sees the bag and retrieves the loose bag before it drifts away in the ocean's currents. As Joe swims past a sea raven camouflaged on top of the Linda's gunnel, Captain Phil has spotted yet another lobster and quickly lunges his arm deep into the hole. This one is also quite large and must weigh 3 to 4 pounds. As our bottom time is slowly ticking away, it's now time to slowly start to make our way back towards the Southern Cross's anchor. Only a few moments later, Rick Schwartz finds another deadeye. Rick had descended later than Mike, but is also quickly running out of bottom time. I decide to give him a hand, and together we secure his lift bag through one of the deadeye's holes. I then take the time to rig my dive reel to be used as an upline. As Phil continues his search for lobsters, air is added into the lift bag, and before long the artifact slowly starts to rise off the bottom and descend through the transparent Atlantic on its way to the surface over 140 feet above. The upline will be spooled out until the bag reaches the surface, then will be tied off to the wreck and will prevent the bag from floating away while we're still submerged. Meanwhile, Phil spots a brass spike, but it's firmly attached to the wreck and would require too much work to remove today. Finally, our planned bottom time is exhausted. Captain Phil leads us back to the Southern Cross's anchor line so we can start our slow ascent to the first safety decompression stop. We've all had not only a productive dive, but have enjoyed excellent conditions while filming this spectacular shipwreck. It's days like these that make it all worthwhile. While decompressing, everyone wonders whether Mike's lift bag floated away or was retrieved. At 20 feet, we can clearly see the Southern Cross floating above us. After our hang is over, we start to head up. As hoped, Mike's lift bag is securely fastened to the Southern Cross's stern. Mike is overjoyed and is definitely a happy camper. Mike poses with the newest addition to his ever-growing artifact collection. Stay tuned. When Dive Wreck Valley returns, we'll be climbing back aboard the Southern Cross and taking a closer look at our artifacts. To climb back aboard the Southern Cross. We're very lucky and get the opportunity to visit quite a few historical wrecks each season, but this one certainly stands out from the rest, not only because of its clear water, abundance of lobsters and great artifacts, but because of the historical intrigue of exploring an unidentified shipwreck. After climbing back aboard, Mike's lift bag is pulled over to the swim platform and his deadeye is hoisted aboard. Steve and Mike start the slow cleaning process immediately and utilize a small sledgehammer to chip off the heavy conglomerate, encrusting much of the wooden artifact. As Mike and Steve continue to work on cleaning the deadeye, Phil's mate jumps in and swims out to retrieve Rick's lift bag, which is still secured in position with an upline.
That lift bag.
Rick's bag is also pulled to the back of the boat, and then the second deadeye is hoisted aboard. The cleaning process is started once again, and before long, much of the heavy incrustation is chipped away. It's important to clean these artifacts as soon as possible. Otherwise, the dried conglomerate becomes much more difficult to remove. Of course, cleaning is only the first step before presentation. Most artifacts recovered from shipwrecks also need to be preserved so they do not deteriorate as they dry out.
So Rick, how'd you find the deadeye? Where was it? Just laying in the sand, or how'd you find it?
Just laying in the sand. All I saw was the bent strap coming up. There was another 18 inches or so on the end of this, and that was sticking straight out of the sand. Deadeye was completely buried.
Oh, that's weird.
And I had just seen a friend of mine had picked up one, and I recognized the strap as being roughly the right width. So I started wiggling on it, and the whole thing popped out as a big conglomerate.